More than half of Britain's 180,000 miners have now stopped work because of the National Union of Mine Workers' strike against pit closures. The miners are either on strike themselves or they've turned away from picket lines after arriving to start work. The Coal Board chairman, Mr. Ian McGregor, has warned the miners that a long strike will only serve to speed up the pit closure programme.
I remember an industrialist telling me, our job is to discover what the customer will buy and to produce it.
All their references are to the business, or to the company, or to the board. I've said it before and I'll say it again. They never talk about human beings whose investment is their very lives in this industry. And that is the thing that this movement should take into account.
Well, Roger Tiley is a documentary photographer. As a young press photographer in the 80s, he took pictures of miners in South Wales before and during the strike, and recently returned to former mining communities to find the miners in his original photographs. Roger, good morning.
Good morning.
Does it seem like 30 years ago to you?
It doesn't at all. It seems like yesterday.
I'm sure. And those memories, as clear as your photographs?
I think so. I mean, I was looking at my photographs a few months ago, which triggered this project, to be honest. And when I looked through them, I just couldn't believe it was 30 years ago. And I just wondered what had happened to the miners that I photographed and their families as well.
Which we'll come to. But what about your story in the midst of all of this? What are your memories of that time?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was born and brought up in the valleys, you know, from Crosskeys, a small village in the Gwent valleys. So there was collieries just up the road. Some of my relatives worked in the mines, you know, over the years. So when this strike happened, I mean, I remember reading about the 1926 strike and soup kitchens and, you know, all the demonstrations and so on. And then when the South Wales miners went on strike, it was just unbelievable, really, that it reflected the 1926 strike in many ways. So as a young photographer, I mean, it was great to go out, and it was on my doorstep. Yeah. So, you know, I spent a lot of time photographing it.
And is that what you sought to do, to capture timeless images, if you like, but of their time, but also that you could, that would connect back to previous disputes?
Well, yeah, I think it was the same principle, you know, you know, I witnessed miners and their families losing their houses, miners losing their wives as well. It was desperate times. And sometimes I felt that, should I be photographing this? But, you know, as a trained photographer, it was my job to really witness it. But I found myself taking part in it quite a lot because, you know, it was my own people, as it were. You know, it was people that I grew up with. I remember school friends being miners and being on picket lines and so on. So it was very personal.
Really? That's the real Kevin Carter dilemma then, isn't it?
It is, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But you put the camera down, and what did you do?
Well, I mean, sometimes you know, I helped with the food parcels sometimes, you know, when they needed help, so they needed an extra pair of hands, you know. So it was, you know, my main priority was to capture pictures because I was a working photographer, you know, and the newspapers wanted some pictures. But I think my pictures were very sympathetic towards the miners. And, you know, and the fair play to the national newspapers, they used those pictures.
They did want them, did they? Because going back to a discussion we had an hour ago about how the newspapers, many of them were largely controlled by the government press department, and a lot of the coverage was very sympathetic towards the government and the police side of things. You found picture editors, newspaper editors were more than happy to take your pictures too?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there was chosen newspapers that used my images, and there were some newspapers that would never use my images. But yeah, I mean, it was a different side because obviously photographers came down from London and further afield, and they spent maybe a few hours photographing, you know, a picket line which was quite violent. But you know, being from the valleys, I photographed the after effects of that, and I stayed, you know, and so I could spend time photographing, and that really is the difference between my documentary photography and photojournalism. And
the after effects still there to this day. I'm sure that's what you discovered, wasn't it, when you went in search of your subjects recently?
Well, absolutely. I mean, the miners that went back to work, you know, that there's miners that were striking at the time will still not speak to those miners that went back to work. So, as I say, it was like yesterday, really.
Where can people find your photographs?
Well, I have a website, you know, www.rogertiley.com. The the work is due to go on exhibition at the National Library of Wales in 2015. That's going to be the first venue. But I'm quite surprised at the interest really in my work and my return to photograph the miners now. You know, it still is very poignant and very newsworthy.
Well, they are terrific images, and I urge anybody, if they can't get to the National Library, certainly to get to an internet and have a look on your website. Thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you, Ollie.
Thanks for telling us the story.
Brilliant.
Roger
Thank you.
Tiley.